Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I am talking about watches. And today I'm going to be doing a full in-depth review of what I think is my favourite watch of all time. Yes, and I don't just mean watches that I have in my collection, not just watches that I've experienced before, but even better than watches that I have in my head that might be my potential grail watches. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not going to say that this watch is finished better than some of these holy grail watches I have in my head. I'm not going to say the technology and the movement inside is as good as some of these watches that I have in my head as grail watches, but that doesn't seem to matter because I love this watch so much more that even when I put it side by side in my head, or even side by side in real life, I like this one better. There is just something very, very special about it. Now, what is this watch? Well, this is my Hamilton Jazzmaster Traveler 2 GMT. Now, please be aware, this is not the current watch that is in the Hamilton lineup. It is one of the previous generations of Jazzmaster Travelers. The current one that is out at the moment is available, obviously, and it's nice. It's okay. I look at it on the website and I think, yeah, that's a nice looking watch. But when I look at this one, I think, wow, I absolutely love it. And I absolutely love this watch. But there were some big problems with this watch, or at least my perceived big problems with this watch when I first saw a picture of it. When I first saw a picture of this, I thought, wow, that watch is gorgeous. I absolutely love it. But the issue was threefold. Firstly, price. Because when I sort of looked online, you could still sort of get either new old stock or used versions of it, but they were hovering around about 2,000 Australian dollars. And for me, that's pushing my sort of limits of how much I'm willing to spend on a watch. Secondly, the dimensions that are sort of specified online, it scared me a little bit because the lug to lug was so large, and that made me think, wow, I don't think that's going to fit my wrist. Am I going to spend thousands of dollars on a watch that I don't even get to handle first, and then have it arrive and then it not fit me? That was a big issue. That sort of stopped me buying this watch for a long time. Next was that it comes in two colors. This is the silver variation, but it also comes as a black dial as well. And I like the black dial variation. I think it looks nice, but there's something about this silver dial. It just speaks to me. The only problem with the silver dial variation is it doesn't come on a bracelet. As you can see, I do have it on a bracelet. But it comes on this really awesome leather strap, which I'm going to show you today as well. But it was the black dial that came on the bracelet. And I thought, well, I'm not going to spend a couple of grand on a watch that may not fit me and come on a leather strap when I know that even though I don't mind leather straps, it's not a sort of an option that I like to wear day in, day out. I like watches on bracelets. Obviously, I've now bought the watch. I ended up getting it for an amazing price on the used market. I ended up figuring out that you could buy the bracelet aftermarket, and because it was a previous generation of watch, it actually wasn't that expensive, and it is designed specifically for this watch, so it does fit it perfectly. And I made that leap of faith when it came to sizing, and thankfully the size does fit me. Yes, it's a relatively big watch, but it still fits my wrist really well. If you are a regular watcher of my channel, you would have seen a first impressions of this watch some time ago. And there is a very, very good reason why I've left it so long before doing the full in-depth review. Because normally, 4 to 6 weeks is how much time I like to have a watch on wrist before I get a proper understanding of it and then want to make that full in-depth review. But this one, well, I was having this honeymoon period with it. When it arrived, I fell in love with it even more than I thought I would. And I was so obsessed with it that I had to wear it every single day. And that kept happening day after day, day after day. And I got to that 4 to 6 week period and I still had that same feeling in my head. And I didn't want to make a full review of a watch when I wasn't really at that point where I hadn't finished sort of that little honeymoon period, because I didn't want to be so starstruck by a watch that I didn't give you a proper sort of pros and cons sort of review. But the problem was that honeymoon period has never actually really finished. It has started to settle down a little bit. I've got to the point now where I don't have to wear it every single day. I've been able to get back into my own collection and actually spread it out amongst my sort of weekly wear. However, I could absolutely still wear this one every single day. But I do feel that I'm at least at a point now to do this review and give you a better sort of understanding of this watch. Now guys, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I really would appreciate if you just click on that subscribe button. It's a quick, easy and free way for you guys to support me and the channel, and it makes such a difference to me and the channel. Now guys, that's enough of me talking. Let's flip the camera around and let's check out this Hamilton Jazzmaster Traveler 2 GMT, this one here. So I do want to say that this is not the original box that came with this watch, because I did not get the box that came with this watch. However, I'm the kind of person that needs a box for a watch, even though it does sit in a drawer and never gets looked at. The original box that came with this one was that lovely timber box. This was an aftermarket one. Well, I actually think it is an original Hamilton box, but it is not the one that came with it. But I still want to show it to you, because if you happen to own a Hamilton and you want to buy a box for it, well, you can actually get a good one for around about 60 Australian dollars. Still comes nicely presented, still looks particularly nice, and opens up that way, and it presents the watch really, really well. Now, as I mentioned, this watch didn't originally come on a bracelet, and you couldn't actually buy it on the bracelet. Well, at least I don't think you could buy it on the bracelet. What you could buy it on, and what it does come with, is this amazing ostrich leather bracelet. Now, I am wearing this on my SEAGULL watch because I think it looks absolutely fantastic on it, but it is an absolutely brilliant, brilliant leather strap. If you like leather straps, well, then you're not going to be disappointed in this one, because I'm not even a huge leather strap person, but I love this one. And part of the reason for buying this watch was so that I could utilize this strap. But we're not here to talk about the strap, we're here to talk about this watch. But I did want to at least show off this strap for you guys today, because it is particularly good. So when this watch was actually for sale from Hamilton, it came in two variations. It came in this silver dial with this leather strap, or it also came in a black dial on this bracelet that I've got the watch on. Obviously, I actually wanted the silver dial on the metal strap, so I actually bought the bracelet separately, but I just love the silver dial, which is why I needed it in this sort of combination. I'm glad that it did come with a leather strap, however, because it is such a good strap, I'm really glad to now utilize it on a different watch. But when you could buy it brand new, it cost around about 2,000 Australian dollars, which is not exactly the cheapest watch out there on the market, but I think it absolutely represents good value for this watch. But of course, I did not pay 2,000 Australian dollars for it. Firstly, it didn't come with the bracelet. Secondly, it had been a well-used watch, and it also didn't come with the box. So I got it for well and truly under $1,000. I then bought this box for around 50 or 60 Australian dollars, and the bracelet for it, which is designed for this watch, more specifically the black dial version, was about 200 Australian dollars. And all of that was well under 1,000 Australian dollars. And for that amount of money, I was able to justify buying it. And I'm really glad that I did, because it has turned out to be my favorite watch. One of the things that was scaring most about it was the dimensions. And let me talk you through those dimensions. The case is 43 millimeters. The width of the watch is 11.5 millimeters. The scary dimension was a lug-to-lug of 52.2 millimeters. On this particular bracelet, in this to suit my 6 3/4 inch wrist, it is 166 grams, and it has a 22 millimeter lug width. Now, that does sound a little bit scary, doesn't it? Quite a large watch, a very long lug-to-lug as well. And for me, in my own experiences, I think the sweet spot for a lug-to-lug for me is about 48. I'm happy to go a little bit smaller. I'm happy to push it out to about 50 normally as well. But beyond 50 scares me, because I've had watches before that don't sit right on my wrist because of it. But I've also had some experiences with watches with larger lug-to-lug that work really well on my wrist. But for this one, because I wasn't able to try it on first, it was a bit of a leap of faith. But what I can tell you, because it does have those sort of female end links, because it does curve down quite considerably, it fits really well on my 6 3/4 inch wrist. I certainly wouldn't be recommending it for a person with a huge amount smaller wrist than me. If you have a 6.5 inch wrist, I think you're really going to be pushing it with this one. But 6 3/4, perfectly fine. Anything above that, of course, would be even better. But why do I love this watch so much? Well, let's check out this dial, because this is what it's all about for me. It has this beautiful sunburst silver dial. Check out that sunburst. I think that is absolutely fantastic. And now check out those applied indices, those applied numbers, and check out the hands. They are delicate, but just perfect. There is something about them that is just well finished, well executed, and although they look quite dressy, they look quite delicate, they're just done extremely well. And it's just something about it that really stands out to me. Look how delicate that second hand is, how long it is, but how perfect it looks. I think it looks absolutely fantastic. Obviously, it is a GMT watch, so it has a GMT hand. Doesn't stand out too much, but it really adds to the overall aesthetics of the watch, and I think that is fantastic too. Obviously, being a GMT watch, it needs to then have a hour track or a 24-hour track, which is printed in and around there. We have printed on Hamilton automatic 660 feet. Yes, 660 feet. That's 200 meters of water resistance for a very dressy, sporty watch. So that's another big positive of this one. Printed on is GMT as well. This is all in black. And then we have the internal rotating bezel. This one here has a sort of a 15 to 20 minute sort of minute counter, and that drops back to sort of every second, showing you the 30, the 45 as well. You got an inverted triangle, and then you got hour markers that go around. And what's that, you say? Is there lume on this watch? There absolutely is lume on this watch, and it's particularly good. Let's check out that lume now. Obviously, it's very delicate, but it is quite strong and it is quite good, and it's a lot better than I actually expected for a watch that looks like this. Now, of course, we have twin crowns because we have an internal rotating bezel, and I just have a thing for twin crowns. I have to admit, I think it looks good. I like the functionality of it, but I just think it looks quite cool. And when you look at that internal bezel and you look at that dial, it's all under a single piece of domed sapphire crystal that is beautiful. And it gives you that really nice distortion as well at extreme angles, which I particularly do appreciate, especially on a watch that looks like this. Now, to utilize the rotating bezel, you have a screw down crown down here at the 430. You unscrew, and you then have this beautiful actioned internal rotating bezel. And wow, does it feel good. Yes, it does. It really does feel good. There's no clicking, no juttering. It's just this very smooth sweep that, of course, you can line it up to whatever you want, so it's going to have perfect alignment. Being screwed down helps with that 200 meters water resistance, obviously. Both of those crowns are signed with the Hamilton H. And then we come to one of my next favorite parts about this watch. It is the side profile. We have brushing on these little sort of lugs with a nice bit of high polish in the middle. And I love when it has these sort of lugs sort of attached. It reminds me a little bit of my Seiko Samurai. So we have brushing here, polishing on a chamfered edge. We have brushing on the tops of those lugs. And then we have a mixture of brushing and high polish on that solid bezel as well. And we have the same on the other side. And I think it just looks quite good. So you can check out those lugs. They look like they're sort of been attached. It has a real sort of a vintage vibe to it, which I really do appreciate. Now, you're probably going to ask, is this a true GMT? Well, that depends on your idea of what a true GMT is. You can't independently move the hour hand, so it's not a true GMT. But you can independently move the GMT hand, so it gives you the full functionality of a GMT, even though you can't flick back and forth between the hours. And you do that with the crown up here at the 2 o'clock or the 2:30. You can unscrew it. Inside here, we have an ETA 2893-2. It has 40 hours of power reserve. It has hand winding. Of course, it has hacking. Of course, at the full out position, you can then move the hands around, which you can then see the GMT hand there is slave to it. To adjust the date, you move into the first position, roll down. Yep, I did it the right way. That's fantastic. You can change the date and then go the other way. And we can now, an hour at a time, click, 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 flick that GMT hand around. Screw it back in again to achieve that 200 meters of water resistance. And what is this ETA like on the time grapher? Well, let's check it out because it'd be quite interesting to see. This watch is a few years old now, so let's see what this ETA performs like on the time grapher after being in full use for quite some time. So for a movement that is at least probably 5 years old, that hasn't been serviced yet, there's a decent set of numbers, aren't there? You can see it's a high beat, 28,800 vibrations per hour, very minimal beat error, amplitude perfectly good at 256, and running just below zero, about -2 to -4. At a watch of this sort of age that has been regularly worn, those are a good set of figures, and I'm very, very pleased with them. But what about this bracelet? What about this thing that I bought aftermarket? Well, it wasn't exactly aftermarket. This is a Hamilton bracelet that is designed for this watch, well, specifically the black dial, so it fits perfectly in there. But is it any good? Well, absolutely. We've got solid end links that fit very, very well. They transition really nicely into the case as well. There's a mix between high polish and brushed on those H's. It comes with a pin and collar system, which I think is actually okay. I think it actually is a little bit neater than screws on this sort of dressy style watch, even though I do prefer screws. Obviously, it is a solid stainless steel bracelet. Those H's are a 1 link, and then the little bit in between is another couple of links there, just like that. Obviously, you can tell it is a butterfly clasp. Not my favorite types of clasps on watches, however, it absolutely suits this style of watch. It's a slightly dressy sort of adventure watch, that's what I've been calling it. And because it has that sort of dressy look to it, it sort of helps having this sort of seamless sort of clasp. And it is actually very nice on wrist. It really sort of melds into your sort of underside of your wrist and just looks very, very nice. Now, I've already shown off this a little bit, but it is ostrich leather. It is nice and thick, very pliable, comes in amazing sort of hardware, listed with Hamilton. Very, very, very thick, very, very nice wearing, listed as Hamilton there. Really lovely. It is the best leather strap that I've ever experienced. Not only does it look very cool and has a nice color and nice hardware, but it actually sits very nicely on wrist as well. And it is very nice of the previous owner to wear it in so well, so it does fit so well on my wrist. But let's put that aside because we're not talking about the leather strap, we're not talking about the SEAGULL, we're talking about this Hamilton. And let's check out the case back, because we have a display case back showing off that ETA movement with a custom rotor with Hamilton written on there. It actually is a very nice looking movement. It's nice to have a see-through case back looking at a nice movement. We've got a whole bunch of specifications, tells you that it's sapphire crystal, Swiss made. It's got the model number, which is H326250, water resistance to 20 bar, or 20 or 290 PSI, stainless steel, and then it's got the 2893-2, which is obviously the movement that's inside there. Really nice looking movement, that one. But I guess the main thing we want out of a watch is it to look good on wrist. So how good does this one look on my wrist? Well, I think it looks absolutely fantastic. I do like wearing watches a little bit loose, so it moves around a little bit. Also, being winter here in Australia, my wrists are probably the thinnest they're ever going to be. But as you can see, if you put it on wrist, you can see that the lugs fit well and truly within my wrist. Not by a huge amount, but more than enough to allow then the bracelet to curve out and around. And that's what I want to see. I want to see the bracelet curve out and around my wrist. So when I'm looking down, I'm not just seeing that. If I see that, that's when I know a watch doesn't fit me very well and I don't appreciate it and I don't enjoy it. Has a nice, very thin sort of look of the case, and you can see how it sort of sits quite nicely down onto my wrist as well. And that really helps sort of snug and settle down into my wrist. It's also so very, very comfortable. It's one of the nicest watches I've ever had on wrist. Has a nice weight to it, has a nice look to it. And yes, it has a dressy sort of feel to it with that sort of look of that dial and those hands, but it also has a bit of an adventure feel to it. Has great water resistance, has all the abilities that you need, has that GMT functionality. It sort of ticks so many boxes that I never knew I wanted out of a watch. I absolutely love it. So what do I like about this watch? What don't I like about this watch? And what would I change? Well, I like everything about it. There's nothing I'd change. There's nothing I dislike. Well, that's not exactly true, is it? Well, it almost is. But what do I really, really love about this watch? The dial, that sunburst effect, there is something very special, especially when you then take into account these lovely hands and those indices. There is something sort of magical about it. I really do like it. As mentioned, I like the twin crowns. I think it gives a really interesting aesthetic to the watch, and I love how those lugs look and how it's broken up with that piece of polished steel in between those brush lugs. Wonderful. Love the look of that movement in the back as well. Just a good watch, just a good looking watch, just an amazing watch. But of course, there must be some things that I dislike. Let me just... No, there's nothing that I really dislike, but there's a couple of things that I think are worth sort of pointing out. They're not even things that I would change, they're just things that are worth pointing out. Let's just check out the minute track around the outside here, shall we? Or the lack of the minute track. We've got a minute track between the 12 and the 20, but then it changes to like a second track. And that internal sort of track, well, that's not a minute track, that's just for the GMT hand. So if you're setting your time of this watch and it's not in between 12 and the 4 there, well then it's really hard to judge and line up where the minute hand is going to go. because you can't exactly judge. So the only way to actually accurately put the time on this watch is to move the bezel. So say if I want to make it, let's say I want to make it 36 past. Well, let's line that up with the 6. I can then now move the hands to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Move it to that 6. But as you can see, it doesn't line up with that other little indice in there, or that other line. So you actually have to do that to then line up the minute hand. So that is probably a slight negative. Or at least when you're setting the time, you can just sort of approximate it. So that's, yeah, probably not the perfect thing about the watch, but certainly nothing that really detracts from it too much. I guess 2 other things certainly doesn't make me like it any less. That's polished. I don't know why watch companies continue putting case backs as polished, because there's going to accrue some scratches, and this one definitely has. Not a big issue. This is also not sapphire crystal. This is just mineral crystal, which for me, it makes no difference because you're not really seeing it anyway. But at a watch that would have been around about $2,000 new, it would have been nice to have that as sapphire crystal as well. But other than that, it's a perfect watch. Well, it's a perfect watch for me. I absolutely love it. What do you guys think? But let's flip the camera around back to me and let me give you some of the final very positive thoughts about my Hamilton. So you probably understand at this point in the video that I absolutely love this watch. But let me just explain to you what it has done to me, because it's done a couple of specific things to me. Firstly, it has made me sort of rethink grail watches, because even though I still have some grail watches in my head, watches that I can't afford right now, watches that I hope to own in the distant future, it does sort of make me think, well, there is a affordable watch, well at least a watch that I was able to afford that I like just as much. So maybe I don't need those grail watches. Or perhaps I should start looking a little bit more around this sort of price range or at other watches and sort of rethink about what I think a grail watch actually is. Do I actually need it to be an expensive watch? Well, no, and I know I don't actually need a watch to be expensive to like it or even love it. So it is really giving me that opportunity to really see and feel and experience a watch that is within a sort of financial reaching point for me right now that I know I love just as much as one of those possible grail watches in my future. And I know that I think when I look at this watch and I put it side by side with a much more expensive watch, which I've done a few times now, that I like this watch just as much. And I think it's just one wrist experience is fantastic, and I really enjoy it. I know that the movement inside of it is not sort of up to the standards compared to a Grand Seiko. I know that the finishing on it isn't the same as, let me say, a Grand Seiko again, because they are such a good watch to sort of compare it against. But that doesn't mean I don't love it just as much, or even if I don't love it even more than that watch. And I think the reason why I love this watch so much is it does 2 things for me. It does things that I call my head. These are sort of the logical reasons why I like a watch. When I'm looking at something in a particular sort of type of watch, I have a sort of checklist in my head, a tick box checklist that I want to tick off for that particular watch. And it might have to do with quality or bracelet, it might have to do with movement, it might have to do with finishing or look or size. It might be a bunch of things, but there are really these checklists that I have in my head. When this watch arrived, it checked off all those boxes, and then it checked off a whole bunch of boxes that I hadn't even thought about. And that's a really good thing. If a watch ticks boxes for me like that, I tend to like it. But it also does something else. It was what I sort of call my heart, my sort of emotional connection with a watch. I sometimes have watches arrive that I know might be a few little issues, it doesn't tick every box in my sort of head, but I still love them and I think they're fantastic. This watch, I had an instant emotional connection with, and it ticked everything inside my head. So these 2 things together, when they come together in sync with a watch, it means that I'm going to love it. It's happened a couple of times before with watches, but this one even more so. And that's why I think I love this watch so much. Now guys, I've probably talked way too much in this video, so I am going to stop now. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. I do hope to see you in the next one.